Alright, let's talk about how to add and subtract rational numbers. Now remember, a rational number is a decimal or a fraction. Okay, our objective today is going to be to learn to add and subtract decimals and rational numbers with like denominators. Now that's important because today all we're going to have to be dealing with is fractions with like denominators. Alright, let's take a look at our next slide. Alright, here are examples today. We're going to have 4. Okay, the first 2 are going to be decimals. The third one is going to be a fraction. Now, if you remember from last year, whenever we are adding and subtracting decimals, we have to line up the decimals. Okay, that's the first thing we have to do. We're going to line up the decimals. Okay, so let's take a look at our next slide, which we're actually going to be working on these 2 examples right here. Alright, our first one here we have negative 1.2 plus 8.4. Now remember, we're going to line up our decimals, so we need to pay close attention to where the decimal is at on both of these. So I'm simply going to have 8.4 plus negative 1.2. Now, notice I lined up my decimals. That's my most important thing. Alright, now once I have that, I need to remember my integer rules. My integer rules aren't going to go away. I'm going to have to continue using these things for the rest of the year. So, if I notice my signs are different, which means I have to subtract. Okay, now my decimal's already lined up, and I'm going to just drop my decimal straight down. Then I'm going to subtract. 4 minus 2 is 2. 8 minus 1 is 7. The 8.4 is larger than my 1.2. Therefore, I have to keep the sign of my 8.4, which is positive, so my answer is going to be 7.2. That's all there is to it. Okay, let's take a look at our next one. The next one says 2.5 plus negative 2.8. Again, the first thing I have to do is line up my decimals. So I'm simply going to have 2.8, I guess negative 2.8, plus 2.5. Okay, then, reminder, we lined up our decimals. Then I'm going to follow my integer rules just like I normally would. Well, my signs are different, which means I have to subtract. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and drop my decimal down. I'm going to subtract. 8 minus 5 is 3. 2 minus 2 is 0. Okay, now, let's look at these numbers. What number is bigger, 2.8 or 2.5? Well, 2.8 is larger, and since it's negative, that means my answer also has to be negative. So my answer is negative 0.3. Now, if you don't have that 0 in front of the decimal, that's okay. If you just left it negative 0.3, that would be acceptable as well. Alright, let's take a look at our next slide. Alright, our next 2 examples, the first one up here is dealing with fractions. Now, the best part I can say about dealing with fractions today is they have common denominators, so that's one less step we have to worry about. Because whenever we're adding or subtracting fractions, we have to have common denominators. Okay? Now, once the denominators are the same, we really just look at our numerators, and we're going to add or subtract depending on whatever we're supposed to do. Okay? So, let's take a look at this. I have 3/4 plus a negative 5/4. Okay, again, my denominators are the same, so I don't have to worry about that. Now, so I really am just going to look at my numerators, because since my denominators are both 4, that means The denominator is going to stay the same, so all I have to do is figure out my numerator or top number. Okay, so I look at my 3 and my 5, which this is really like negative 5 right here, because this negative sign is in front of this 5/4, so this is like negative 5/4. So I need to use my integer rules again. Well, the signs are different, therefore I need to subtract. So 5 minus 3 is 2. So I know that my numerator is 2. I know that the 5/4 is bigger than 3/4, therefore my answer has to be negative 2/4. Or if I were to say, what is the same thing as 2/4? Well, 1/2 is the same thing as 2/4 when we simplify that. So our answer would be negative 1/2. Okay, it's that simple. All right, let's take a look at our last example, example 4. In example 4 says 62.1 plus x for x equals negative 127.0. Well, we know that that means it's 62.1 plus negative 127.0 because we have to substitute that value into my x. This 127 right here, to substitute that into my x right there. Okay. Now, if you remember our examples that we were doing just a moment ago, we know that we have to line up our decimals. Okay, so I'm going to have 127.0 plus 62.1. Again, I lined up my decimals. Okay, so once we have that, now we can work it out like we normally would. Use my integer rules again. I guess I forgot to put that negative sign on there, which is important. I need to look at these and say, well, my signs are different, so I need to follow my integer rules, which say if the signs are different, I have to subtract. So I'm going to have to subtract these two numbers. So I'll start out by borrowing here. 10 minus 1 is 9. I'll drop my decimal straight down. 6 minus 2 is 4. Again, I have to borrow over here. 12 minus 6 is 6. And, well, that's just 0. So my answer is going to be 64.9, but now I need to go back and double check, see what my sign is going to be. What number is bigger, 127 or 62.1? Well, 127 obviously is bigger, and it has this negative sign in front of it, so my answer also is going to be negative. So I'm going to get negative 64.9. It's that simple. You guys can do this. Just remember, you need to use your integer rules. Good luck.